It's a privilege to be with all of you. I got here last night, and the homies have been texting me, and where are you? And I say Omaha, and it's like I've been giving these geography classes. You know, they insist it's in Iowa or Idaho or something, and then they say it's freezing. Must be freezing there. I go, no, that's not what's happening. So. Anyway, it's a privilege to be with all of you here, and I've been to Omaha many times and Creighton many times. It's the privilege of my life for over 30 years to have worked with gang members, and the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God than the thousands of men and women I've been privileged to know through Homeboy Industries and before that. People like Luis Perez, who was kind of a force of nature, gang member, tattooed, was in prison, heroin addict, but he worked at Homeboy for like 10 years, and he was something of a you know, force of nature, and kind of helped run the place. But he also was a good speaker. He would get called over to schools, and then they asked for him by name, you know, and so he was quite in demand. And he and we went out to dinner, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. He said, you know, you gotta pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit, that's good. That is some good advice, so brace yourselves. You know, here's why I think you're here. It doesn't have anything to do with me, certainly. It has to do with this vision you have, where you want to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly, I think, when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we together in Omaha imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? How do we together find a way to dismantle the barriers that exclude? How do we create this place of kinship and connection? And so we go out to the margins, because if you stand at the margins, look under your feet, they're getting erased. Just because you chose to go there and put yourself in the vicinity there, just because you stood and stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, because you stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. Everyone in this room has had the experience of, and the great privilege, to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and you get to stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And so you try to create a place of kinship and connection, because no kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly focused you may well be on those worthy goals, they actually can't happen unless there's an undergirding sense that we belong to each other. And so you brace yourselves, and you go to the margins, and you prepare yourself for the folks who will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. You go to the margins, and those voices get heard. But kinship is the place of connection. It's the place where resilience is born. At Homeboy, we are kind of dedicated to this community of tenderness, tenderness being the highest form of spirituality. Tenderness is the finishing touch on love. At Homeboy, we think love is the answer, but community is the context. But tenderness is the methodology. If it's not tender, it doesn't connect. it stays in the air. Your love just stays in the ether or in your head or even in your heart. But unless it becomes tender, there's no connective tissue. And that's kind of the key thing for resilience, it seems to me. It's all about relationship. So at Homeboy, you know, for over 30 years, you know, enemies, rivals have worked together, and somehow nobody works out their differences. We all kind of discover our samenesses. So over the last 30 years, the homies have taught me everything of value, and I'm so grateful to them. But in the last few years, they taught me how to text, and I'm really grateful to them because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good at it, you know, LOL and OMG and BTW, and the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. I'm sure I'm not alone in being vexed by this autocorrect thing, you know, like I had a homegirl, tough cookie named Bertha, and she texted me on a Sunday, "Where you at?" I said, "I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas," and monjas is Spanish for sisters, nuns, religious women. I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas. I pushed send, and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas, which she thought was pretty darn interesting. Even now, I've been here 24 hours, and the homies their hair is on fire, and they're blowing up my cell phone, and oh my gosh, my rent, and they're cutting off my lights, and my car payment. All this stuff happens only all the time. And this one guy needed $100 to finish off his rent. I just didn't have it, so I simply texted him back, "Things are tight." And I pushed send, and autocorrect told him, "Thongs are tight." And he said, "Sorry to hear that. You know, what about my rent?" So anyway, so there I am in a car with two older vatos, Manuel and Poncho, who do a variety of things at Homeboy, and they're going to help me give a talk at a high school some distance from Homeboy. And we have our morning meeting every morning where we gather, hundreds and hundreds of us, for 10 minutes, where we have a prayer and a thought for the day and announcements. And then we hopped in the car. Manuel was in the front seat, Poncho was in the back, and we're on the road, like not 15 minutes when Manuel gets an incoming, and he reads it to himself and he chuckles. And I said, "What is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's dumb, it's from Snoopy, back at the office." I'd just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo as the day began. Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room, where they clock in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gang members who work there. It's a tough job. I would not want it. I said, "Well, what's he saying?" "Oh, it's dumb. Hang on, let me find it. Here it is. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy." Well, I nearly drove into oncoming traffic. We laughed so damn hard. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other, because I remember. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? I suspect if kinship happened to be our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. But we have to go out of our way to bridge any kind of distance that exists between us. Even in service, you know, everybody in this room is engaged in it. But there's distance in service, you know, service provider, service recipient. At Homeboy, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all a cry for help. We're all in need of healing. It's one of the things that joins us together as members of the human family. Service is where you begin, but it can't be where you end. Service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. You want to get to the ballroom, which is the place of exquisite mutuality. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, the great labor farm worker organizer, and he was the best listener I've ever been in the presence of. If you were having a conversation with Cesar Chavez, nobody else existed. He was laser beam focused. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important was on the approach. But once, famously, a reporter had commented to him and said, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar shrugged and smiled and said, the feeling's mutual. And it is. How do we bridge any distance that exists between the people we're privileged to accompany? I was in Houston giving a talk, and a hardcore gang intervention worker came up to me, a guy working in the streets, working with gang members. And he kind of pleaded with me. He said, how do you reach them? I said, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? You don't go to the margins to make a difference, because then it's about you. You don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make us different. And so that there is no daylight that separates us, service provider, service recipient. Probably in our entire history, no homie found more job opportunities than this guy we all called Dreamer. And Dreamer, I knew him since he was a little kid growing up in the housing projects where I was pastor. And he's in his 40s now. He's doing okay, married, house, kids, a good construction job. But in his early 20s, he was kind of a yo-yo, in and out of being locked up. A very smart kid, though I don't recall he ever went to school, I don't think. But a dangerous sense of humor, a very funny kid. And so in his early 20s, he was a kind of a yo-yo, in and out of being locked up. I'd find him a job in the private sector, or I'd find him a job in one of our social enterprises. And he would always very quickly gravitate to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of, and then he'd wander back to me. And this was a pattern that kept repeating itself. So this one time, he finished a 4-month stretch, a probation violation in county jail. There he is sitting in front of me. And he says what gang members often say, this time, it'll be different. I said, well, okay. So with him sitting there, I picked up the phone. I called a friend of mine named Gary, who ran a vending machine company. And he had hired homies in the past. I'm hoping against hope, maybe he'll do it again. And sure enough, he does. He says, you tell that guy he can start tomorrow. That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer began work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is in front of my desk, and I couldn't even believe my eyeballs. I said, Híjole Madre Santa, here we go all over again. But this time he pulls out of his pocket his very first paycheck, and he waves it proudly, and he says, damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, gosh, you know. Who? And he looks at me strangely and he says, well, God, of course. I said, oh, sure, sure. No, that's right. That would be God. You thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh. God's number one. He looks at me and he says, you know, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, yeah, because God would have been had struck down your ass already by now. Well, we just fell out of our chairs, howled with laughter. And I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider, who's the service recipient. It's mutual. So as was mentioned in that kind introduction, Homeboy was born a long time ago when I was pastor of a very poor parish, middle of 2 housing projects. Largest concentration of gang activity in the whole world was my parish. LA has 120,000 gang members and 1,100 gangs. And my parish had 8 gangs at war with each other in these 2 housing projects. So I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 250th about 3 months ago now. Not all from that community, but I know a lot of gang members. I get asked to do this. First thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So they were, in the middle of the day when they should be in school, they were wreaking havoc and writing on the walls, violent, selling drugs. So I walked out to them in the projects and I would kind of isolate them one at a time, and I'd say, hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, you know, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so that kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church is our parochial school, grades K to 8. The first 2 floors are the school, and the entire 3rd floor was the convent where the ninjas lived. And so I gathered all the nuns in the living room upstairs there, and I sat them down and I said, hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out, and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members? And they looked at each other and they said, sure. And that's what we did. And that brought gang members in large numbers to the church property, which created kind of a disconnect. You know, people in the parish started to say, hey, wait a minute. Let me see if I got this right. Aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. So that was a good gospel challenge. And then the gang members said, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't so forthcoming. So we invented things: a maintenance crew, landscaping crew, graffiti removal crew, a crew to build our child care center at the church, all made up of rival enemy gang members. And then in 1992 was the unrest that followed the Rodney King verdict, and the whole city, or at least every pocket of poverty in Los Angeles, just ignited and exploded, except the poorest part of the city, which was my parish. So the LA Times wanted to know why, and I said, well, I think it might have something to do with the fact that 60 strategically hired gang members, all from rival gangs, were working side by side with each other. They had a reason to get up in the morning, and a reason not to torch their own community, and a reason not to gangbang. So the next day after the article appeared, Ray Stark, who was a movie producer, summoned me, and he happened to have $500 million. And he said, what should I do with my money? When I look back on it now, I see I woefully undershot my request, but I was young. But I said, well, you know, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. You could buy that. It has ovens. We can put hairnets on rival enemy gang members. They could bake bread together. I don't know, we could call it Homeboy Bakery. And he said, sure, just like that. And so a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market in downtown LA. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this. And not every business worked. You know, I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was a total failure. Who knew people didn't want gang members in their homes? I did not see that coming. And nobody ever intends to do such a thing, but we really have just evolved. We backed our way into becoming now the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet Earth. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors, our huge headquarters in Chinatown in downtown LA. They mainly want to be a part of this 18-month training program because it's a paid gig, but there's also the word on the street is that it's a good place to be. Here's the thing that I think it took us a long time to discover, that an educated gang member or returning citizen may or may not reoffend. And an employed one may or may not reoffend. But a healed gang member or returning citizen will not ever go back to prison. I guarantee you that. Because what happens is, in fact, resilience. They gain a resilience born of knowing the truth of who they are, having done their own work. They come to terms with what was done to them and what they did. They re-identify who they are in the world. Oh, I used to think courage was packing a gun. Okay, that doesn't have anything to do with courage. And then they leave us after 18 months. And now the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they won't be toppled by it. And it's all about relationship, and it's all about healing, and it's all about creating a community of tenderness, which I think is the secret sauce at Homeboy Industries. Along with all that is we have classes, we have all the things that every menu that you would find in any city that tries to deal with this issue: anger management, parenting, grief and loss, a GED, domestic violence classes. We still have a school. Free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. We have a designated clinic in our headquarters, 3 laser machines, 1 paid physician assistant, but 47 volunteer doctors. And if you go to the margins and open your ears and listen, folks at the margins will tell you what would help. So tattoo removal was born because of a guy named Frank who wandered 2 days out of Corcoran State Prison. I'd never met him before. He's sitting in front of my desk and tattooed on his forehead, filling the whole space like a whole big old damn billboard. And pardon my French, it says, "Fuck the world." And he says, "You know, I am having a hard time finding a job." And I said, "Well, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one." And I'm thinking, where do I send this guy, you know, to McDonald's? You know, do you want fries with that? No, I don't want fries. So naturally, I hired him, and he bagged bread for a while, and I went trying to find a dermatologist who had a laser machine, and I found one at White Memorial Hospital, and this guy donated 1 hour a month to chip away at Frank's forehead and a handful of others. And before no time at all, I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted this service. So we couldn't really stay with that arrangement. Parentheses, Frank, right now, is a security guard at a movie studio in Hollywood, and there is no trace left of the angriest, dumbest thing Frank had ever done, proving once and for all that all of us are a whole lot more than the worst things we've ever done. And then we have all our social enterprises, Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, where we sell our logo stuff, Homeboy Diner, the only place you can buy food at City Hall. We have a restaurant at Terminal 4 at LAX Airport. Farmers markets, we have a thing called Homeboy Grocery, where we sell chips, salsas, and guacamole in all the Ralph's stores from the middle of the state to the bottom of the state. Homeboy Recycling, that's our newest business and really quite a successful one. It's e-waste, electronic waste. Solar panel installation training program, hugely successful. 85% placement percentile of those who complete the program, and they get nationally certified in solar panel installation. What am I missing? Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And it's kind of a who's who if you've ever been there. You're always going to run into some elected or some movie star. Jim Carrey goes there often, and Jack Black and Forrest Whitaker. And once with 2 hours notice, we got a call from the Secret Service saying that Vice President Joe Biden, when he was Vice President, was going to drop by to have lunch at the famous Homegirl Cafe. So it was entourage and motorcade and selfies with Uncle Joe. I wasn't there. I was making my annual silent 8-day retreat, and when I got home, I see this homie, a trainee named Louie, and Louie's going to debrief me. He said, while you were gone, we were visited by an MVP. I said, do you mean like a VIP? He goes, yeah, that one, VIP. He goes, damn, gee, imagine here at Homeboy, we were visited by the Vice President of the United States, Mitt Romney. I think you can file that one under all white people look alike. I think we started a current affairs course shortly after that, but most famously of all, Diane Keaton came to visit, movie star, Godfather, Oscar winner. And her waitress is Glenda. Glenda's a big girl. Been there, done that, tattooed, felon, parolee, gang member. She has no clue who Diane Keaton is, and so she's taken her order, and Diane Keaton says, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 dishes she particularly likes, and Diane Keaton says, I'll have that second one. That one really sounds good. And it's at that moment, for some reason, something dawns on Glenda. She looks at Diane Keaton, she says, wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere, you know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. Oh, gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before. And then Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. That just took my breath away when we heard it. I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. Exactly what God had in mind. And if you'll permit me, Jesus looks at the gathered and he says that you may be one. That's it. That's the whole 9 yards. All of us are called to be enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. At Homeboy, we're really allergic to the idea of holding the bar up and asking folks to measure up. You just show up, hold the mirror up, tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth and my truth is a gang member's truth. It's all the same truth. Here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks, especially those on the margins, as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep that out. Death can't even touch it because it's huge. You reach in and you tell them that truth. And you do it in a community of kinship and tenderness, because everyone who walks through our doors comes with a big old backpack of chronic toxic stress. And unless they feel safe, they'll never find relief, and they'll never get to resilience, and they'll never get to an ability to know the truth of who they are. So folks come to Homeboy and we give them sanctuary. And then they become the sanctuary that they sought there. And then they go home and they provide that sanctuary to their kids, and you've broken a cycle. But sometimes you have to reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep folks from seeing their truth. For the principal suffering of the poor, Marcus Borg writes, is shame and disgrace. And I think that's quite right. In the Acts of the Apostles, they have this odd and curious sentence out of the blue, and it says simply this: and awe came upon everyone. And it suggests that the measure of our health in any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So I was invited to speak some years ago to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And it was in one of those all-day gang-in services, you know, where they're going to teach the social workers about gangs from 9 to 5 at a hotel ballroom. And I figured, I said yes, I figured maybe I'll do a keynote, or maybe I'll speak at lunch, or maybe I'll close the day. So I bought my ticket. A week before I was to fly, I pulled the letter out, and to my horror, I discover that I am to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And I said to myself, oh, hell no. So I called two homies and trainees, Andre and Jose, and they're like in their 16th month of our 18-month training program. And so I sit them down and I said, look, you're flying with me at the end of the week to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of these 600 social workers. I'd like you to tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I never heard their stories, and Jose gets up in front of these 600 social workers, and I guess he's probably about 25 years old. Gang member, been to prison, tattooed, but in his 16th month, he had gravitated and became a very valued member of our substance abuse team, which is quite large. And he's a man solid in his own recovery, and now he's helping younger homies with their addiction issues. A felon, parolee, been to prison, but he also had a long stretch as a homeless man, and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers. He says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish, he said to them, you know. And honest to God, we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. I guess I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door. The guy comes to the door. She says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me. My grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt, because the blood would seep through. Second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, "I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds?" And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. So there I was on the Dr. Phil show. I know, what was I thinking? But he was going to dedicate a whole hour to Homeboy Industries, so how bad can this be? And so he introduces me, and there he is sitting on his stool in the middle of the stage, and my empty stool is next to him awaiting me. And to my horror, on his side of the stage is a gorgeous mahogany coffin on one of those 4-wheel dolly deals. On my side of the stage was a perfectly reconstructed jail cell with bed, toilet, sink, bars. They went to great expense for these 2 set pieces. And you already know where this is headed. So they fly 3 young males, boys really, teenagers, African-American, Latino, and a Caucasian kid, each with their very distraught single mothers. And one at a time, they'd bring the kid out with their mom. And Phil would sort of grab them figuratively by the lapel. "Don't you see where this choice is leading you?" These are kids gravitating perilously close to gang involvement. And he did this one after another. Finally, when he got to the 3rd kid, I said, "You know, Phil, these kids don't need more data. They have all the information they need. They know this better than we do. They know this will lead to death or to prison. They don't care that it will. And that's your key diagnostic moment. Gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and who doesn't know by now that misery loves company? No hopeful kid has ever joined a gang, ever, in the history of kids. Ever. No exception. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang, always fleeing something. Also, no exception. A reporter not that long ago said, "Well, of course, we all know that kids join gangs because they want to belong." And I said, "Well, actually, no." Everyone knows that, you know, like we were in a Geico commercial or something. And I said, "Well, no, everybody says that, but it's not true." The outsider view drives the inside of our policy. The outsider view drives the inside of how we see this. I was in a big city in this country, and I gave a talk, and the next morning they had kind of breakfast with stakeholders, chief of police, mayor, community activists. And the chief handed me this brochure that you would hand out to parents, telltale signs that your kid is gravitating perilously close to gang involvement or something like that. And I opened it in big, writ large capital letters. The #1 reason why kids join gangs. Excitement. I said, wow. If I were to compile a list of 100 reasons, excitement wouldn't be one of them. Not even one of them. But that's the outsider view driving the inside of how we see things. It's about a lethal absence of hope. And there are only 3 profiles of kids who join gangs. Not 8, not 5, only 3. The first profile of a kid who does is the despondent kid. This is a kid who can't imagine tomorrow. And if you can't imagine your future, then your present isn't compelling for you. And if your present doesn't compel you, then you will not care whether you inflict harm. And you will not care whether you duck to get out of harm's way. The second profile of a kid who joins a gang is a traumatized, damaged kid who can't see his way clear to transform his pain, so he just keeps transmitting it and inflicting it. And the third profile of a kid who joins a gang is a mentally ill kid. But they're all on a continuum of severity. Some kids are more despondent than mentally ill. Some are more traumatized than despondent. And you have never met a healthy treatment plan that was born of a bad diagnosis. But if we got this diagnosis right, what would we do? We would infuse hope to kids for whom hope is foreign. We would help heal the traumatized. And we would deliver mental health services in a timely and culturally appropriate way. Homeboy Industries is not for those who need help. It's only for those who want it. You have to walk through the door. But every single one has those 3 in one degree or another active: despair, trauma, or they're struggling with mental health issues. And so you do the same thing with the folks who have returned to you from prison or who have awakened to a new way of living and are tired of being tired. So I'm going to close with this story and then open it up for your questions. It's funny, if I could, I was interviewed on the Christian Broadcasting Network once, and this nice lady asked me about what we do at Homeboy, and I told her all the things I told you. Tattoo removal, therapy, everybody's in therapy, community of tenderness, job training, legal team that expunges records. I mean, I just went on and on and on. When I finished, she looked at me and she said, yeah, but how much time do you spend each day at Homeboy? You know, praising God. And I didn't know what to say, so I said, all damn day? And I don't think she liked that answer very much. But it helped me beg this question: what kind of praise does our God have any interest in? So it occurs sometimes for universities to force their students to read my books against their will. And I'm not complaining. Now I have 2 books, but Gonzaga University in Spokane, which is my alma mater, forced their incoming freshmen to read Tattoos on the Heart. And they said, could you come and speak? And we're going to have a huge venue. Tuesday night, 1,000 people. And I said, sure. And they said, can you bring 2 homies with you? And I said, sure. And I always do if somebody's going to pay for it, you know. And so I said, and I always pick homies the same way. I always pick enemies, rivals who work together as trainees, just to force them to share a hotel room, just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. You know, it's not that long ago I was flying to DC with 2 older guys, and one of them, dead serious, said, hey, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, yes, it's actually a requirement. We'll be coming home on American. So I picked two, I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times, and I picked Bobby, an African-American gang member who worked in our bakery, and Mario, who worked in our merchandise store. I've done this so many times with men and women. Never picked anybody like this guy, Mario. Oh my God, it was actually starting to freak me out. He was so petrified, so terrified of flying, that he was hyperventilating, you know. And we hadn't even boarded the plane yet, you know. And so we were at Burbank Airport, which is a tiny airport, and big bay windows, Southwest Airlines, and they don't have that hermetically sealed chute. So, you know, for you to board the plane, you have to walk out onto the tarmac and climb the stair, you know, like you're the president. And they have stairs at the front of the plane and stairs at the back of the plane. Big planes, though. And so I'm sitting there with Mario, and Bobby's off walking somewhere, and our plane arrives. It's early morning, and I said, "That's our plane." And I think, wow, he may actually die before we climb those stairs. And then I see our flight crew arrives, and two female flight attendants, both carrying very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the front steps and to board the plane. And Mario goes, "When are we going to board the plane?" I said, "Well, you know, as soon as they sober up the pilots, there they go now." Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. So I should tell you that in our 30-year history at Homeboy, nobody has ever worked there more tattooed than Mario, which is saying a lot, trust me. I mean, he's all sleeved out. He's neck is blackened with the name of his gang. His head is shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say "the end," so that when he's lying in his coffin, there will be no doubt about this, I guess. And so I'd never been in public with him, so I'm trying to calm him down. We're walking through the airport, and people are like this, you know, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely. I'm thinking, wow, isn't that interesting? Because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow, ask anybody there who's the kindest, most gentle, tender soul who works there, they won't say me. They'll say, Mario. Yeah, Mario. He now works selling the baked goods over the counter at our cafe. He's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So we get to Gonzaga, and the big talk's Tuesday night. What they don't tell you, of course, is that there are 93 other talks they have planned for you throughout the day before the big nighttime talk. Class, lunch, meeting, class, all damn day. So I said, look, I'm not going to speak at these things. You guys get up and tell your stories. And they do, and they're particularly terrified, especially Mario, but they do a good job. Stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every imaginable kind. And I would not have survived a day of their childhoods. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. So the nighttime talk came, and the venue was packed, and people are sitting on the floor. And I said, I don't think I had planned to do this, but I said, I want you guys to get up before me. And each of you do 7 minutes apiece. Tell your stories. And so they did, and they were quite nervous, but they were quite compelling. Then I got up and did my thing. And then I invited them up to stand on either side of me and entertaining questions, you know. And yes, ma'am, and a woman stands and she goes, yeah, I got a question, it's for Mario. First question out the gates for Mario. And Mario's this tall, skinny drink of water, and he's clutching the microphone. Yes, and he's just terrified. And she goes, well, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter. They're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone. I can feel the emotions rising, and he's starting to tremble, and he's getting a damn hernia trying to figure out what the hell he's going to say. when suddenly he blurts out, "I just..." And as soon as he says these two words, he rushes back to his microphone-clutching, closed-eyed retreat. And now I know he's losing his battle with his tears, but he wants to get this entire sentence out. "I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me." And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry, and she says, "Why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you." And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had returned him to himself. But rest assured that everybody in that room had been returned to themselves, which shouldn't surprise us because it's mutual. And I think that's the only praise our God has any interest in. That you may be one. Suddenly kinship so quickly. And so you go to the margins, and pretty soon you cease to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. You don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make us different. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. So we're just gonna, just till 2:15, 12 minutes, and you just go like this, I'll go like that. We're not gonna do the microphone. Just yell it out, I'll repeat it so that people can hear the question. Yes?
Can you define what you mean by healed?
Okay, can I define what I mean by healed? That's an excellent question. Not sure I've ever actually gotten it before. I don't know, there's a kind of a wholeness for folks, where they know how to kind of moderate and modulate their own stress. In the early days, we used to say, we had the t-shirts that said, "Nothing stops a bullet like a job." So all we did was job. And in the early days, when we called ourselves Jobs for a Future, we would dispatch homies to, "Hey, I just found you a job over here. Well, this is not a job, this is a career, go. Here's a good one here, go." And then we thought, phew. And then what would happen is the monkey wrench would get tossed into their life. His lady leaves him. And suddenly he's back in the neighborhood. And now the guy I have in mind named Robert is doing 125 years to life at Folsom Prison. So that was kind of the impetus of saying, no, we need to change what we're doing, that it's about healing. And the healing is, you can list the things, resilience. You're not toppled by things. You know how to, tolerate stress. You're not bothered by things. You're not paranoid. I think that's kind of the new frontier is mental health. Not in the designation of people, schizophrenic, psychotic, bipolar, all that kind of stuff, which is part of the reality. But, here's an odd example. But the other day I was talking with some homies in my office, and I said, I was asking myself, I told them, why don't I own a gun? And the answer I came up with was that I am more or less, by and large, mentally healthy. That's why I don't own a gun. And why does Jacob, who every time he comes into my office with his backpack, have a gun in his backpack? Because Jacob is more or less, by and large, not mentally healthy right now. And the homies I was talking to were homies who run the place now. And you don't own guns now, you used to, because you're pretty much healthy. You're not paranoid, you don't believe in the boogeyman, you don't feel the need to defend anything or protect anything. You don't believe in conspiracy theories. You don't think the government's out to take us over. I mean, there's a list of things that are kind of signs that more or less, by and large, you would not be mentally sound. But I think they expected me to say another answer. You know, why don't I own a gun? Well, you're a priest. Or, no, it's because it's about health. And obviously that shouldn't be, there's no kind of stigma connected to it. People who need this kind of healing. Who's in prison? Bad people? Oh, come on, nobody's that unsophisticated. But folks who need healing, who need health. Stupid people? No, come on. You know, Donald Trump the other day with the Parkland in Florida, he said, this guy's pure evil. And I go, you're not even trying. You know, that no more captures what this is about. It's about our health. And then when a police chief hands me this brochure and says, we just want to help kids make better choices. And I go, no. Not all choices are created equal. I mean, I grew up in the gang capital of the world. There was no chance that I would ever become a gang member. And that's not because I'm morally superior to Mario. Quite the opposite. The day won't ever come, ever, when I'm as noble as that guy. But I won all these lotteries. I won the parent lottery, the zip code lottery, the education lottery, on and on and on. Don't say it's about choice, because not all choices are created equal. And every single person in this room and every single person outside of this room, we were all born wanting the same things. And then something happens. Poverty, racism, abuse, despair, schizophrenia. Where did that come from? You know, the guy who shot up the movie theater in Colorado, the mother took the stand and she said, my son never chose schizophrenia. It chose him. My nephew, a few years ago, 31 years old, hung himself in my sister's basement. He didn't choose schizophrenia. It chose him. Not all choices are created equal. Some people have to carry more than other folks. That's why it's about healing. It has nothing to do with morality. Nothing to do with morality. Nothing. Well, don't they know the difference between right and wrong? Nothing to do with morality. And there are tons of books you can read that would be helpful, like The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, for example. Anyway, see, here's the problem. You ask a question, long ass answer. We got time for two more. Anybody? Anything? Yes, way back there.
All beginnings are hard. What kept you going?
What keeps me going?
What kept you going at first? Because that was the toughest.
Okay, what kept me going? I don't know. I think the thing that causes burnout, and maybe I'll end with this because it's an excellent question. You will burn out if it's about you. You will burn out if you want to save lives. You will burn out if you want to make a difference, because it's only about you. if you want to make a difference. I won't tell you this whole story, but in my first book, I talk about Lulu, a kid who, you know, gang member selling crack cocaine, and then he became his own best customer. And I said, it's probably time for you to go to rehab, and he resisted, and then until he said yes. So I drove him to a mountaintop drug rehab. 30 days into his stay there, his brother does, also a gang member, does what gang members don't ever do. He put a gun to his head and killed himself. Gang members are more likely to walk into harm's way, into enemy territory, hoping to die. But they don't normally do that. So I called Lulu to tell him about his younger brother, Eric, and of course he was devastated. I said, look, I'm going to pick you up for the funeral, but I'm going to drive you straight back. He says, I want you to, because I like how recovery feels. So I go to pick him up to take him to the funeral, and he gives me a big hug. He gets in the car, and then he says, I had a dream last night, and you were in it. And in the dream, we'll say we're in a room this size, just for purposes of quickening this. And total blackness, no lights, no illuminated exit signs, no light creeping under any door, pitch black. I know you're there in the room with me, but we're not speaking. And suddenly in the darkness and in the silence, I reach into my pocket and I have a flashlight, and I aim it steadily on the light switch on the wall, and the beam of light is hitting the light switch. And Lulu, as he's interpreting and telling me the story, he goes, I know that I'm the only one who can turn the light switch on. I'm really grateful that you happen to have a flashlight. And so in the dream, he walks with great trepidation following this beam of light. And when he gets to the light switch, he flips it on, and the room is flooded with light. And now he's sobbing as he's telling me this dream, and he says, the light is better than the darkness. Like he didn't know this to be the case. I've never had anything like this in my whole life have this most immediate effect on me. It changed my life. I literally went from wanting to save lives to holding a flashlight. That no amount of me wanting Lulu to have a life will ever be the same as Lulu wanting to have one. But everyone in this room owns a flashlight, and you know where to aim it. But I was trying to turn the light switch on for people, and it's crazy making. It will make you burn out. So I tell my staff, I said, if you're exhausted, that's appropriate. If you're depleted, you're doing it wrong. If you're depleted, it's about you. You won't last. And the antidote to that is staying anchored, absolutely anchored in the present moment, in the here and now, in the person in front of you, in the decision and intentionality of tenderness that keeps you in the present moment. In the living room, I call it, stay in the living room. Because you go quickly to lament. Why did I do that 2 days ago? I can't believe I said that. Lament is the bathroom. And anxiety is the kitchen. So what am I going to prepare? Well, how's this going to work? Nothing against kitchens or bathrooms, but the living room is the place of the present moment. The only place tenderness can happen, knowing that we're only saved in the present moment, period. Not 4 months from now. And so if you stay anchored with the person in front of you, it works. And so I'll end with this. There are homies that you end up, homies who you don't know how they're going to turn this ship around. There was a kid named Danny who I met him when he was 13. He vowed to me, I will never step foot in Homeboy Industries. And so he was a knucklehead, put a lot of work in for his neighborhood and guns and did a lot of stuff. So I'd see him subsequently in juvenile hall, probation camp, youth authority facilities, till he finally went to prison at 18, and he just did a 2-year stretch. And in recovery, they say it takes what it takes. You know, for recovery of a gang member, it's the same thing. The birth of a son, the death of a friend, a long stretch in prison. For Danny, this is what it took. He got out of prison and discovered that his mother had 6 months to live, pancreatic cancer. And so he became her caregiver. And I would watch him with her, very tender. All the more remarkable because this woman tortured this kid. She died. A week later, I buried her. And a week later, for the very first time in his life, he walks into Homeboy. And I watch him in our training program, laughing and getting his GED, and now in classes at community college. I watch him laughing and has his arm around guys, enemies, who I know he used to shoot at. One day he comes into my office and he says, what happened to me yesterday has never happened to me in my whole life. He tells me that at work's end at 5 o'clock, he was on the train right across the street from us, the Gold Line heading east to go home. Packed train, but he gets a seat. Standing right in front of him, holding onto a pole, he says, is a medio pedo guy, a guy who's a little bit drunk. He's a homie because I can see tattoos on his hand. Older guy, I don't know who he is. And Danny's wearing a sweatshirt that fills the insignia, Homeboy Industries, jobs not jails, fills his chest. And the drunk guy says, hey, you work there? And Danny doesn't know whether to engage him, and he kind of shrugs. He goes, yeah. Is it any good? And Danny says, well, it's helped me. In fact, I don't think I'm going to go back to prison because of this place. So Danny gets up and he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a piece of paper. He gets a pen and he begins to write the address of Homeboy Industries on the piece of paper. And as he's telling me the story, he says, I couldn't believe I knew the address by heart. So he hands it to the guy and he says, come see us. We'll help you. And the guy studies the piece of paper and he says, thank you. And the train stops and the guy gets off and Danny sits down again. And now, as he's telling me the story, he returns to that earlier refrain. What happened to me next has never happened to me in my life. Everyone on the train is staring at me. Everyone on the train is nodding at me. Everyone on the train was smiling at me. And now he can barely finish this story. And for the first time in my life, I felt admired. And the two of us, we just wept, anchored in the present moment. And you don't go to the margins to make a difference. But if you go there, we all find rescue. Thank you very much.